1 minute to abandon ship. The ship will automatically destruct in T minus 1 minute.
I will win the crowd. I will give them something they've never seen before.
Indiana, we are simply passing through history. This is history.
Hold on to your butts.
Now, what shall we talk about?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to the Duel of the Greats podcast, Season 1, Episode 4, Worst of the Best Week. Last week, we did the best of the best, the two movies from both these directors that had won Best Picture. This week, we do Worst of the Best, the two worst movies that either director has directed. Now, before we get started, a bit of a mea culpa here. So we have a very specific methodology created by our resident historian, Steve Shepard here. And that is, with that, we got a little confused when we were doing the outro from last week. We said it was going to be The Counselor, we said it was going to be 1941 from Steven Spielberg and Legend from Ridley Scott, but it's actually 1941 from Steven Spielberg and The Counselor from Ridley Scott. That's what we'll be discussing this week. Sorry for the confusion if you were really hoping to get that Legend discussion.
Fall on the sword, it's me. My bad.
But we're here. So, before we get started, folks, with me as always, like I said, our resident historian, Stephen Shepard, and our resident theologian, scholar, Nathan Carter. How are you guys doing this evening? I always feel weird saying how are you doing this evening on a podcast because most people probably listening to it at like 9 in the morning at work. So wherever you are, good day to you, good evening, good morrow, whatever it is. So, but anyway, we'll just jump right in here. So, like I said, we got a distinct methodology before we get in, and you know, as always, we're going to be comparing these movies directly, as if you've listened to the first 3 episodes so far, which you should. If you haven't, go on back. And if you were just typing for podcasts about Steven Spielberg's 1941 and this is what came up, then go ahead and go back and look at the other listen to the other episodes that we have, and you can kind of get a feel for what we're about. But we're going to compare them.
And also, why were you searching for that? What drove you to search specifically?
Let us know why you were searching for that specifically, please. But so yeah, we're gonna compare and contrast the directors, what they did well, what they didn't do well, and in this case, for this week, it's going to be a lot that they didn't do well. But that's okay. That's the fun. This is going to be a fun episode. As always, though, spoiler warning: if you haven't seen 1941 is like 45 years old almost at this point. So sorry, I'm not going to apologize too much. The Counselor is 10 years old now, so I still won't apologize too much for that. But spoiler warning, if you haven't seen any of them and you want, we're going to talk about everything. So that's out there. And, some of these movies deal with some serious topics. Last week we talked about Schindler's List, etc. And so, this week there's The Counselor is a very violent movie. So if any of that stuff triggers you, fair warning on that. And if you feel like you want to skip this episode until we have a little more wholesome stuff, that's absolutely fine. Anyway, as I talked about, we have a very specific methodology for how we determined what movies we were going to talk about. And that was all Steve that created that. So Steve, I'm going to kick it over to you, and you're going to explain this so they know where we're coming from when we're looking at these, how we determine these movies here.
All right, I can sure do that. So if you're on this podcast, listening to this podcast, you probably are familiar with Rotten Tomatoes. It is a ratings and review aggregator website for movies. And essentially, they have what they call their tomato meter. And it takes a bunch of different reviews from different...
it's the tomatometer, Steve. Come on.
Yeah, you're right. Thermometer, thermometer, tomatometer, thermometer, whatever. But... basically, it takes it aggregates critical reviews and essentially gives a percentage of the percentage of critics that liked it. Essentially, so the higher on the tomatometer, the better the movie. If it's quote unquote certified fresh, that means it's good. And if you actually go on the website, it has a fun little tomato. It's a nice, ripe, juicy looking tomato. If it's not fresh, Is there a term if it's not fresh? It's just rotten. It's a rotten movie. Hence
It's
the,
rotten. It's
hence
rotten,
the name of the whole website. Anyway, it has a nice visual of a nasty green splotch. So what I did was I took the tomato meter percentages, and then I took the audience score percentages, which are different, and I combined the two essentially. I averaged them out, and then I went boop and rated all the director's films. We took the very bottom combined score for both of those, which turned out to be 1941 and The Counselor. As he mentioned last week, so for a long time after we planned this, for some reason, at one point when I checked this, I came up with Legend, the Ridley Scott's movie Legend, starring Tom Cruise, as the worst rated. I don't know how I screwed that up so bad, because it's not even close to the worst one. It's like in the bottom third, but it's definitely not the worst. So I hope we get a chance to watch that movie, because it looks batshit crazy bananas, but we're not watching it today. So anyway.
Yeah, Steve's
okay.
our resident historian, so he usually gives us our background here on all these. So take it away.
1941 is a film from 1979, directed by Steven Spielberg. If you haven't seen it, the plot synopsis is pretty simple. Pearl Harbor, which, December 7th, 1941, day they'll live in infamy. The Japanese attack us. They sink, a whole bunch of battleships. It's bad news for everybody involved. I guess except for the Japanese. Regardless, there was a war scare in mainland America. And this movie is actually kind of based on a couple of true things that happened. A Japanese submarine did actually shell a fuel refinery in California. And there was like, they call it the Battle of Los Angeles. It really actually kind of did happen. It was a scare, a war scare, just kind of like what happens in this movie. Not quite to the same extent. But essentially,
also not to be confused with Battle Los Angeles, which is a movie completely different,
much higher body count. Although I don't know after watching this movie.
And many more aliens.
That's true, quite a few more. But people were scared. They didn't know if the Japanese were going to actually come and invade and attack, and so that's what this movie is about. And it actually was originally pitched by the writers, who we'll talk about here in a minute, as a serious depiction. And that clearly didn't happen. This turned into a satire pretty quick. Actually, once Steven Spielberg and MGM got their hands on it. The original writers were Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who you may know as the team behind Back to the Future. And they also co-wrote, they pitched it originally, and then once it turned into more of a studio project, John Milius got involved too. If you have never heard of him, he's about as polar opposite as you could get from Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, which is crazy. At least to me, I thought that was interesting. He wrote the screenplay for Apocalypse Now. He wrote and directed The Wind and the Lion, which is a historical epic. You might not have seen that, but you've definitely seen or heard of Conan the Barbarian and Red Dawn, the original. He wrote and directed both of those too. I think he also directed like Clear and Present Danger. So that's the kind of guy you're thinking of, along with the fun, Back to the Future folks. It turned into be a, very strange combination. But anyway, Spielberg liked it, and he hopped on board. They pitched John Wayne actually to play the general character at one point, and he wasn't having it. According to Wikipedia, again, check your sources. It's a great place to go at first, but you want to make sure that the source that they link to actually is legit. But he felt like it was disrespectful. He said, "You're making fun of a war that cost thousands of lives." That's my John Wayne, apparently. I don't think it's very good. So he's not in it. That's the lead, actually. John Wayne, not in this movie. But you know who is in it? Toshiro Mifune, who, if you like film, if you're a film, buff or historian at all, you know him as a really famous Japanese actor in like just about every Akira Kurosawa movie. And that, that's not the only movies he was in. He was an icon in Japan, but he's in this movie as the Japanese sub commander, and I think he does one, he's one of the best parts of the movie. But anyway, we'll get into that later. It's another John Williams movie. He did the score, and apparently Spielberg likes this as his favorite John Williams march, not necessarily piece, but the 1941 march that goes over and over again in this movie, over and over again. It was actually a box office success. It earned $90 million worldwide, but it did not hit the highs of Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is what it was coming on the heels of. So that's why this thing gets kind of pegged as Spielberg's biggest disappointment, his biggest flop. It also was kind of a critical failure at the time. I was looking back at some of the, just doing some research, and it's not like people said it was terrible. Obviously there's outliers of all kinds, but it was just kind of, he was a victim of his own success, really. When you bat 1,000 with freaking, Jaws and Close Encounters, like, any sort of step back is going to feel like a major drop off. So that's where we're at. A lot of people lately, I guess, it's kind of developed a cult following. So I didn't know that, but it's had some, some reevaluations in the years since. Spielberg, I think, really kind of liked making it. He even said he's not embarrassed by it. So I guess that's the kind of the minimum threshold you want of anything you make. And shockingly enough, so when I do this, I look at, what awards these things won. And originally I was looking for like the Razzies, the Golden Raspberries. I didn't even know if they existed back then, but I didn't have to get there because this thing was nominated for 3 freaking Oscars: cinematography, sound, and visual effects. It didn't win any, but still, that if your worst movie is nominated for 3 Oscars, you're doing something right. So that's our first movie, 1941.
We talked about Transformers, though. So again,
hey, that only got 1 though, right? Not 3.
I don't know. It might have gotten more.
Yeah, it might have.
Brandon, look that up for us. How many Oscar nominations did Transformers get?
That's also Michael Bay, not Steven Spielberg. I think
he produced. He was an executive producer. But my point being,
he was.
My point being, he can not necessarily. The technical categories can still be good.
I still think it's a pretty solid floor here if this is your worst movie. This is going up against Ridley Scott's The Counselor. Which, by the way, I guess I should give you the combined tomato meter scores on both of these. 1941 had 40% Rotten Tomatoes tomato meter, the critics score, and 48% audience score for an average of 44. And The Counselor was 34% critics and 23% audience for a total of 28.5. Substantially less popular than 1941. If you haven't seen this one, a lawyer on the Mexican border, the eponymous counselor, he's got a new love in his life, and he also has some new questionable business dealings. He also has questionable ethics, and he wants a little bit of taste of that border drug trade. And so he makes some choices, and things kind of spin out of control from there. So it was actually written by Cormac McCarthy, who you probably recognize the name. He wrote The Road, the book. Several of his other movies were turned into movies, including No Country for Old Men, which, we'll get into it. But this movie, I think, wants to be that movie, and it's not. But regardless, this was the first movie that Cormac McCarthy actually wrote a spec script for. So instead of writing a novel and turning it into a movie, he wrote this, and he wrote this from the outset as a movie. Ridley Scott, the second he heard about it, he was like, I'm all in. He said he took it very seriously. These are quotes from Ridley Scott. I stopped everything that morning and read. It was in the form of a novella, not a film script. It read like a book. It took me about an hour and a half to read. Blah, 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 blah. I shouldn't blah, 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 one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, but sorry. So he flew to Albuquerque. I met him on a Monday, and by Monday afternoon, we'd shaken on it. It was that simple. We just shook on it, and that was the deal. So Ridley Scott was really into this movie, the script. So he wanted to do it. God bless him, and he did. One sad bit: his brother Tony Scott tragically took his own life in 2012. That was right during the middle of filming on this. They paused filming for a long period of time because of that, as you can imagine. So the film is dedicated to him, which is nice, but very sad that we lost him. And nothing really. You can't really pivot
Tony
off
Scott
of that.
is his brother, right?
Yes, Tony Scott and Ridley Scott were
the longest time I could never remember. I could never if it was brother or son, but it's his brother.
And they came up kind of together in the music video and commercial space. Not music video, commercial space. I think Tony might have done some music videos. Regardless, they kind of had a very similar path until they diverged once they started doing feature films. But they still were great pals, and Ridley said whenever he would make a movie, he'd send it to Tony for notes, and he'd get like 20, 30 pages of notes back. And he said Tony never sent one to him though for advice. So I thought that was kind of fun. Anyway, the movie it didn't lose money, but it sure wasn't a hit. It was $25 million budget, made 71 million worldwide. Most people said it was god awful. This was one I thought was interesting. Richard Roper of Ebert and Roper fame, after Siskel passed away. Right, Siskel passed away, right? And that's why Roper came on, or did they just?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay. Anyway, so Richard Roper apparently liked it a lot. He said that Ridley, quote, fashioned a sexy, sometimes shockingly violent, literate, and richly textured tale of the Shakespearean consequences of one man's irrevocable act of avarice. I entirely disagree with that. Not to, bury the lead. But anyway, he was one of the few people who liked it. It won no awards, as far as I can tell, except for the MTV Movie Awards as a Best WTF Moment category, or at least did in 2013. And the Cameron Diaz scene, which if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, won that award. So there's your history. I hope you've watched the movies. If you haven't and you're still listening, I'm not sure why, but just go ahead and pause it, go watch the movies, and then come back.
Although, one might suggest that you could save yourself the time if you just want to listen to this. Because I'll start out by saying, when talking about both of these movies, they're not good. And I love Steven Spielberg, and even some of his, I love artificial intelligence, right? I like that movie. Legitimate. I own it. Okay, I like that movie. And 1941, that was a pure struggle for me to get through. I simply, oh man, was this bad? I had always heard about it. Okay, I had always, even though I've been a big Spielberg fan, I don't know if it was because I didn't want to tarnish him in my mind or what, but I just never went back and watched 1941 because I was, topic didn't interest me and all that kind of stuff, and I was just like, I don't know, the comedy for Spielberg, I don't think so. And turns out I was right to do it, but I watched it for this show. We're doing this for you folks, and one of the things that struck me as I was watching it is because sometimes, Spielberg, if there's one criticism that we've talked about this before in earlier episodes, where if there's one thing that there's criticism they can levy on him, it's that he's maybe too saccharine with some of his films and the way he approaches certain topics. And I don't think that even though I don't agree that it's necessarily a fault, I don't dismiss it entirely. But one of the things that I think he does very well is he does add levity to a good bit of his movies and a good bit of very heavy topics without detracting from them. But he does levity very well. He does not do comedy very well. And 1941 is a strict, straight up comedy, and there's this. It's a fantastic cast, right? John Belushi. Dan Aykroyd's in it. John Candy.
Everybody is in this movie.
Comes out of nowhere.
From 1979. If they were
I
alive,
actually-
they're in this movie.
So many people are in this movie. I actually looked up that I couldn't remember if this movie came out first or the movie Animal House, because it has Tim Matheson, it has John Belushi, and this came out after Animal House. And I wonder if at the time this pulled a lot of, because Animal House was a big hit. I wonder if at the time, I think maybe our generation doesn't recognize that, John Belushi was, a big-name actor that pulled people into movies in the way that, a Will Ferrell does today. And so I think that probably was part of the draw of the movie. It's just the cast had a lot of these SNL stars at the time that were just really, really hot.
Yeah, and, John Belushi he's on the cover, he's on everything. The dude's in it for, 7 minutes. And it's all he doesn't have more than 3 words spoken until the end, basically. And he's just running bow-legged, chasing after his runaway plane, and his plane is just dipping and diving because he's looking at a map, and he's eating glass in the cockpit. It's fucking weird, man. And he's but yeah, I mean, just to go back on the cast, I mean, Christopher Lee is in it, Dracula himself, Lord Tyrannus, Saruman, right? He
Dude, when
plays
I
a
saw
German.
him,
He plays a German who's somehow a German commander who's somehow on this boat with the Japanese. I don't
so
know.
not as
Did
big
you
of a
guys?
stretch as you would think. Like the fact that he was
Okay,
on the
yeah, you
submarine is
know, Steve. I
strange,
don't
but
know.
there were, they had military liaisons between the Axis powers, so it's not inconceivable. But I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous, right? The thing I
So
love about him, sorry, just real quick,
yeah,
he plays a Nazi in this, and I hope I'm not stepping on your thunder here. In real life, he was in like the freaking OSS in World War II, so he probably literally killed a Nazi,
yeah,
and
he
now
was a
he's playing
Nazi
a
hunter.
guy. So I love that.
Yeah, like that show. There's actually a show on TV, or at least I think it's done now, but had Al Pacino in it. I think it's called Hunters, about Nazi hunters, and that was based on the crew that like Christopher Lee was in real life. But anyway, um, so like yeah, and it's just by the way, so I watched this via Crackle. I downloaded the Crackle app to watch this.
I
Did
was
you
going
guys?
to, but there's like 11. It looked like there were like 11 commercial breaks on the Crackle feed.
Yeah, it took like an extra half hour to watch the
I
movie.
didn't want to do that.
So then maybe it's just the Crackle version, but in the scenes where they're on the Japanese submarine and they're talking, like, were there subtitles? Are we supposed to know what they're saying? I didn't have any
subtitles.
I didn't have any subtitles.
Not as a matter of course. A lot of the times it said just, So I
Yeah,
watch
like
everything with closed captions.
if you turn closed captions on, yeah, it might say like indistinct Japanese dialogue
Right,
or something like
right.
that. But like the actual words of what they're saying to each other, were we supposed to know? And I just got a crappy version.
I had it. It was telling me what they were saying for
Really?
most of the
Okay.
time.
Really?
I rented it through, like Apple iTunes, and
Sure.
it was showing me. Now, I just because I'm becoming an old man, I watch a lot of movies that I've never seen before with subtitles in general.
Same.
So it was already showing me subtitles, but then when there was Japanese speakers, it would translate into English what they were saying. So that could have been just because I'm an old guy and I had the subtitles on anyway.
Interesting. I have a strong aversion to subtitles. Like I will watch a movie with them, but weirdly it gives me a headache. Like looking up and down. I don't know. It's a thing. But anyway, so yeah, that was weird. But I just right off the jump, okay, we're talking. So this movie is just context. We've already talked about it. 1979. This movie's made. At this point, Spielberg has made Duel, Sugarland Express, Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Right. That's his filmography at that point, unless I'm missing like a smaller one or something. But so right from the jump, this movie almost shot for shot the opening of Jaws. And this is like a self-referential joke that he's got going on. It's the same. It's the woman,
It's the same
she's
woman.
just running. Is it the
It's
same
literally
woman?
the same actress.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's even, I didn't even know that. That makes
Yeah.
it slightly better. But she's running down the beach and she disrobes and she gets into the water and it's the same beach and it's the same tracking shot. And then, the water starts bubbling, but instead of being pulled under with the shark, then all of a sudden this submarine emerges from the water and the giant like antenna of the submarine just so happens to go right between her legs and she's gripping it and it's just like she gets pulled up and I'm just like, oh my god, I gotta watch this whole thing. And it was like right from the start I was like, this is awful. And I'm like, just is like, I know Jaws was a huge hit and at this point Spielberg was pretty well respected for a young director, but I'm like, you haven't even been around for like 10 years and we're already doing these referential jokes. Like, is this like, is this a little much right here? Just right from the start, I was kind of like, come on, and I mean, did you guys like that or did you think, were you on the same boat as me?
I will have to say, so I started to keep track and I'm curious to know what you guys thought. It is just crazy for a comedy that has so many legitimately funny people, how almost not a single joke lands. I mean, almost not a single joke lands. There were a couple of times I laughed. I did laugh at when John Belushi has this really beautiful shot of the plane flying over what is clearly the Grand Canyon, and he's looking at a map, and as he's looking at the map, he puts the map down and he goes, I'm lost. And so that I thought was kind of funny because he's clearly over the Grand Canyon. And then at one point when there's like it's later in the movie and the Tim Matheson character is trying to take off in this plane and it hits a tower And there's a guy over on the side talking on a radio, and this tower completely collapses and rips this entire military radio console off the table, and the guy doesn't move at all, and he goes, "How do you read me?" And that was like, those are the only two moments that I really got, you got like a genuine laugh out loud for me. And then just about everything else, it just, not a single thing lands. And I'm just, I know comedy can be subjective, and I know a lot of these people were, really famous at the time and big comedians. It wasn't that funny to me.
Well,
Maybe I'm just an easy mark. The whole Slim Pickens bit when he's kidnapped and brought onto the Japanese submarine, he was just cracking me up, especially when he's in the bathroom and he's like, it's literal bathroom humor. I mean, so it's the bottom of the barrel, but he like uses his shoe to make it sound, like he's going to the restroom, and all the sailors, it cuts to them and they'll like lean in real close, like, what's going on? I don't know. That was cracking me up, but
that was mildly humorous, I thought.
I've always thought he's pretty funny.
But to Nate, to your point, I mean, I literally have one of the things I wrote down was, how do you make John Belushi not funny? The dude is just funny by existing. Like, that's his deal. And I'm just sitting there, like, the scene where he's like, it's right before the Grand Canyon thing, where he's it's the same scene, but he's flying, and then he's like, "Oh, I'm thirsty," and he pulls out like a bottle of Coke, and he's like, "Oh, a can of Coke." It's clearly a bottle. I'm guessing that was supposed to be funny, but it just looks like a flub in the, what he said. And he's like, "Can on her," and he doesn't have one, and so he smashes the bottle, and he's
so
just
forced.
shards. It's just terrible.
It's these little like pratfall kind of like silly gimmicky physical humor things that just like, and it just felt like every single one of them was so forced.
Well, yeah, and
I commit to the slapstick, instantly, and it never stops.
And Nate, you say comedy is subjective, which I totally agree with, but this particular comedy I actually don't think is subjective, really. Like this whole David Zuckerman like spoof slapstick thing, like it's pretty objective. That's its whole deal, right? Like, this is the day the shit hits the fan, and then the literal shit hits the fan. It's like, okay, I get it. That's the whole point of that type of humor. And for that still not to land on this, it's just like, it has to be really bad. And it just was like, they were trying to have that like Top Secret. I love that movie. Like, that movie's hilarious. Airplane.
I was
movie's
just gonna
funny.
say Airplane, because Airplane comes out a year later.
It just nails it. Totally nails it.
And every single joke in that movie lands 40 years later. I mean, every single one. And it's just crazy how these movies are separated by 1 year.
Yeah.
And they had all this great comedic talent in both of them. And just one of them is still a stone cold classic. And the other one, you're right. Comedy is subjective, but I'm certainly not the first person to say that this movie was not funny. I mean, this movie is just objectively not funny. But
yeah. Hey everybody, jumping in here. Really sorry to say for this, we had some audio difficulties in the file with this, so unfortunately we lost about 25 minutes of the show. Now, thankfully, we kind of knew what we talked about, so I'm just going to give a quick little recap here, if I can. Excuse me, if I can, about what we talked about, and then we'll kind of resume with the episode, so you can at least have a little bit of feeling of what we had just talked about. So, one of the things that we discussed was in 1941. Spielberg's movie, there were quite a few ethnic jokes that really didn't land. We talked a lot about, there's a scene in a tank where John Candy's character gets hit with some exhaust, and he essentially has blackface on, and then there's a black character who he gets hit with like a bag of flour or something, and then he has white face, and once he realizes he has white face, the black character just kind of laughs and thinks it's funny. And then once John Candy has realizes he has blackface, he completely freaks out almost to tears, and the black character jokingly says, "Get to the back of the tank," and it's just all in poor taste. Should have been poor taste even then, and did not age well. Another thing that we discussed that didn't age well is a lot of these sort of really rapey vibes that different characters have, specifically the Treat Williams and Tim Matheson characters, and in regards to the Nancy Allen character, who's a woman who her entire arc in the entire movie is just, hey, I get really turned on by planes when they take off. And so the other characters, their whole goal, the entire movie, is to get her into a plane and take off in that plane so that they can have sex with her. And what just amounts to a lot of really weird sort of rapey sexual assault vibes. And again, just stuff that does not land, does not go over well. Um, shouldn't have at the time, and definitely doesn't age well at all. Now, some of the things that we did mention too with 1941 is specifically one scene in particular. And this is kind of maybe the best thing about the movie, if you will, where there was a dance scene at the USO. We kind of it was like a USO party, and they had a big dance sequence, and they were talking, and they were there was kind of a fight going on in the middle of the sequence, and it was really well done scene, very interesting. And I actually had mentioned in the original recording that after I saw the show, I went and read from Roger Ebert his review of the movie at the time, and he specifically called out that scene as well as pretty much the only thing that worked and the best thing in the whole movie. And besides the fact that it was the best thing that worked, it was really interesting because there were a lot of similarities from that going into, there was a USO scene that Steve brought up, that was in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, that was very similar. And then just recently, when he released, Spielberg released West Side Story, there was a dance hall sequence that was very, very similar. And we all kind of noted that it was very interesting how 1941 was filmed in 1979. Raiders of the Lost Ark was, or I'm sorry, Temple of the Doom was in the 80s. I can't remember what year exactly. And then, West Side Story was just a couple of years ago. And you see this little sort of nugget of Steven Spielberg of who he is, even even at his worst, and then it still carries through 40 years later to through all these other movies. And it's really cool to see that even when somebody can be at their worst, they can still have that little, yep, that's Steven Spielberg moment. And you knew that's what it was. So that was really cool, even if the rest of the movie um, didn't really nail anything. We also noted that the music was really good, and that Steven Spielberg, had mentioned that John Williams' score, the march sequence in particular for this movie, was one of his favorites. So from there, we kind of transition into the idea that this was early on in Spielberg's career, and it had, you could almost say it was allowable with the folly of youth, if you will. He just unfortunately, he was young, he was full of hubris from his past successes. At this point, he'd already had Jaws, and he'd had, Duel was such a success that it was made for TV and they released it in theaters, and then he had Close Encounters of the Third Kind and all these successes right after another, and he just got kind of too full of himself, I think. And but you can blame that a little bit on folly of youth, but when we shift to The Counselor, start talking about that, it's harder to give that pass to Ridley Scott. The Counselor came out in 2013. That was just 10 years ago. Ridley Scott had been around for about 40 years at that point, so not as easy to excuse what goes on there. And we just kind of, I talked in the original recording a lot about how excited I was. My first experience with it, I was, obviously full grown adult by that point. And so I went and saw it on my own in the theater. I was super pumped. Love Ridley Scott, amazing cast, Michael Fassbender, Brad Pitt, Javier Bardem, Penelope Cruz, Cameron Diaz, like just tons of just really good, very, very prominent actors. And so it's really excited. And I told a story about how sometimes I'll go and see movies later at night, after my wife maybe go to bed, if she's a movie she's not super jazzed on seeing and wants me to see it first, and to see if I can tell her that we should see it, and then we'd go see it again if it's really good. But so that was the way Counselor was. So I went and saw The Counselor, and I came back and told her, no, do not see this movie. We don't want to do it. So it was just the cast was wasted. We talked about how the Counselor, it was written by Cormac McCarthy, excuse me, who wrote the books No Country for Old Men and The Road. So he'd been coming off of some success here from book adaptations that he'd had, but this was the first one that he wrote directly for the screen. And I think you could kind of tell. And I think that we all kind of mentioned, Nate especially hit on how it seemed like the counselor really wanted to be No Country for Old Men. It really wanted to have this sort of treatise on violence and what violence does to people and how it changes people and how it interacts with and shapes the world that we're in. And you know, those are our lofty goals, and No Country for Old Men freaking nails it. That movie, you know, Nate said in his eyes was a masterpiece. I would agree with him, but it's a great movie, and this movie just falls so short in all the areas where that movie succeeded. And then Nate kind of mentioned that for him, Cameron Diaz is an actress who just immediately kind of takes him out of a movie, just because he doesn't find her acting skill, acting style, just her in general. You know, it's hard to remove, hey, that's Cameron Diaz, from just an actor being on the screen. So and he actually brought up a really good point, that the role, like the character that Cameron Diaz played, where this sort of really conniving, sort of mysterious woman, actually almost felt more like a Penelope Cruz role, which was interesting because she played the just naive person who somehow gets involved with the guy who's somehow involved in this drug trade and doesn't know what happened and how it all, and it just kind of sort of pretends that it doesn't exist, even though it'd be hard to say that she doesn't see it. But so that was kind of an interesting point that Nate brought up, where you could, if they had switched roles, maybe that would have made it a lot better movie. Just because those actors, the actresses maybe would have been better fit for those roles. But something we were all in agreement on, in terms of something that was good from The Counselor, was the scenes between Michael Fassbender and Brad Pitt, where those were probably all the best scenes in the movie. And whatever poor writing might have taken place, the writing got kicked up. Steve brought up this point where it seemed that the writing in the movie was bad, but once Brad Pitt gets on screen, they ratcheted it up to 11, and he just kind of nails it. And those scenes are really good. And Steve was absolutely right on with that one. Those are definitely the best parts of the movie. And that is kind of everything that was discussed, obviously in quite a bit more detail. But I just wanted to give as much of a high level overview as we could. Again, we really apologize for this. We're new podcasts. Sometimes these things happen. So we'll make sure going forward, try to make sure it doesn't happen again. So we will do that. But again, we'll plop you right back into the episode right after all the discussions I just outlined take place. So hopefully it won't be too tough of a transition. But thanks for sticking with us through this, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
And I'm still mad about this movie. I'm mad because I think in this movie there is a No Country for Old Men. I think there's an equivalently good movie. I think I think Michael Fassbender, I love him as an actor. I think he's terrible in this. I think they miscast him. I think if you get somebody that's, ironically enough, his co-star in X-Men, picture this movie with James McAvoy, and then the Malink character, Cameron Diaz's character, and her subplots just completely removed. So the whole, her trying to get, steal the drugs and all that, just picture everything else the same. And it's a meditation on choice and getting yourself in too deep and not being able to turn back once you've, already taken certain steps. Because I thought that really hit the El Jefe, I think was the character, the Mexican drug cartel leader who's on the phone with him at one point. I thought that whole bit was really actually pretty good, talking about, you want it to be, this way, but isn't that the line from The Wire? It's like, you want it to be this way, but it's not, or something like that. Anyway, he's like, the point of making the choice is where you want to be, but you're already well past that. You're now firmly in the consequences phase of life. And I thought that all was really pretty powerful. But then it goes back to Cameron Diaz and Natalie Dormer, by the way. Where'd she come from? Awesome. Glad to see her. But
love you, Natalie. If you're listening, we're big fans on this show.
Big fans. But all this, it's like this subplot is unnecessarily convoluted. And that's the thing I thought was craziest. to bring it back into, I guess, our theme, Ridley Scott, some of his, I think the complaints that people would have about him, which to me are very few, are sometimes he likes to just do stuff too much visually, and the stories kind of suffer for it. Sometimes the stories are just too straightforward. Like, I think of Robin Hood a lot. The story is just super straightforward. There's no twists, there's no turns. The dialogue's just meh. And he's just telling you just kind of just plain Jane, straight, thorough story. And he's really getting off on the historical, the setting and all the battles and stuff. And everyone else is just kind of like, well, this is kind of just a boring story. Here, I think it's the opposite. It's just too goddamn convoluted. Which you talked about, Jeff. I don't know who's doing what or why. I think this movie fails because he actually gets away from his Ridley Scottness. And I don't know what he saw in this, but
you talk about a No Country for Old Men being in this movie, and I don't think that's wrong, but I think, more so than the casting, I think if we just back up the timeline a little bit, right? Like if you think about No Country for Old Men, we're essentially walking into this movie at the point where Josh Brolin goes to the motel, right, and hides the money in the vent. Everything is pretty much already done, and it's just, he's already in, and it's about what happens after. So, but if we're to back up, because that whole diatribe at the end is about, there are many different universes, and I thought that diatribe at first it was good and went on way too long. He could have toned down at like the last few parts, but
I can hear that.
But like the Josh Brolin at the very beginning when he finds the bag of money in No Country for Old Men, right? He finds it. He's just a guy. We've already seen him in his trailer. We've seen him interacting with his wife. He finds the money. He's kind of looking around, and do I take this? You can see him go through this thought process of, okay, what am I going to have to do? What's happening now? Am I going to be this person that's going to take it, or am I just going to let it go? And he decides to take it, and once he does, he's in. And then from there, we see all these decisions that he makes because he made that one decision, right? But like, technically there's the point early on in the movie where Javier Bardem's like, you're either in or you're not. And Michael Fassbender says, I'm in. But it's clear he had already made that decision before, well before. And he'd already gotten into this whole business with Javier Bardem well before. And Javier Bardem even says they've known each other for 2 years at that point. So like, if they would have just backed up and shown us a little bit more of why he wanted to get into this. It's greed, it's avarice, whatever. We get that. But just shown a little bit more of just where he was when he made that decision, so we can at least then that scene at the end, that speech hits way harder because we saw who he was before he made this decision, but we didn't see that now. And so it's just this guy who made a shitty decision. He's a shitty person. Nobody in this movie is likable. And so everyone dies. We don't care. Why are we supposed to care about any of this? I even wrote that down. It's like, why do we care?
I think, Jeff, you are saying, whether you know it or not, you're giving an exact description of why visual storytelling can be so powerful. Because the reason No Country for Old Men works is the decision that the character makes, we see it visually.
Mm-hmm.
He stumbles upon it. And by the way, interestingly, it's done with no dialogue. It's not done with a single piece of dialogue. He stumbles on it. He watches it from a distance. It's all visual. He comes up to it. He thinks about it, and then he even goes back later that night. We see visually the steps that he's taking to make this decision. Whereas Michael Fassbender in this movie is just some guy's like, well, you're in or you're out. And then another guy later warns him about being in or out. And he's like, no, I'm in. I feel great. And there's nothing. Whereas every little step in No Country for Old Men, as you see, you literally get to see his thought process of how he's thinking through. He finds the body under the tree. And he's going and he finds the body under the tree. And he's kind of looking around. And there's this whole long sequence where he makes this decision and he kind of he inserts himself into this narrative. There's nothing like that in The Counselor. It's like he's already made the decision when we meet up with the character, and it doesn't feel right. We have, like you said, no idea why we care about this or why we should care about this.
Yeah, and because I have at one point, So the way I make notes is I'll like draw a little arrow, and then I'll make a note, and then if I have a note that corresponds to that one, I'll draw another arrow, like a sort of indent underneath that one, right? And so my indentation at about halfway through goes, we're almost an hour in, and Cameron Diaz just fucked a car, and we have no idea what's happening. And then below that, I say there's a deal with the counselor. And then below that, I say, why should we care? And below that, it's none of these characters are likable. And we're an hour in, and we already got that. So that's more than half, the movie. And it's just, if you're that far in and that's where you're at, it's like, well, there's not really much that can save you for the last hour, even. But yeah, to your point, Steve, about the not being very well written. One of the quotes I have is, the random drug dealers that they're talking about that are, behind all this stuff. Brad Pitt at one point says, they've seen a coincidence. They just don't believe in them. I'm like, oh, we're really philosophical now, boys. Like,
Yeah,
it's just like, come on.
There was a lot of cringing happening on my end on some
Yeah.
of the dialogue.
And
Especially,
and
Go
like
ahead.
Michael Fassbender and Penelope Cruz, the whole crux of Fassbender's him feeling the weight of his decisions is, they talk about so much. How much do you love Nora is her name. How much do you love Nora? Would you be the guy that would take the bullet for her and all this kind of stuff? And he's like, I absolutely would. He's just gets so emotional over it. And like we have no context for the
we don't see
relationship.
that at all. We just
We
see
see
that
at the
they're
very
corn dogs.
beginning, they're pre-coital, post-coital, whatever they
Yeah.
are at that scene. And then, stuff happens in that scene, and we're like, I guess they're, like each other. And then he just buys this extravagant ring, which we spend more time. We get more characterization from the jeweler selling him the diamond than we do his own wife or his fiance that he's proposing to. And
we get
and
more
then-
characterization about the ring than we do about her as a
Yeah.
person.
Basically, we learn like a lot about
learn more about
diamonds
the-
and like how
Yeah.
diamonds are graded than we do almost anything in this movie.
It feels like just I know from stuff I've tried to write, if I ever like research something and I find out something cool, I'm like, well, I'm gonna put this in here. I'm gonna put all this stuff in here. That's what it felt like. Cormac McCarthy probably was like, I'm gonna research diamonds for the scene. It was like, oh man, this stuff's really cool, and just dumps it on there because then like 20 minutes later, he rolls up with Cameron Diaz in a different scene, and she spurts out stuff that's like not quite the same, but close enough. It's supposed to show something about her character, I guess. I don't know, but it's just more excuse for him to throw in diamond knowledge. It was absurd, and we don't. And then
Great.
and then Michael Fassbender calls Penelope Cruz like, I fucked up. We got to go. Let's go to Boise. Or it was her idea to go to Boise, and then she didn't ever stop and be like, whoa, you're just a lawyer. What's going on here? Never once. She was just like, okay, I'm scared, but let's go. And it's like, it just.
The most she got was she's like, how bad? And he's like, real bad.
And then it's like, okay, well, in that case, we'll go to Boise. No big deal. Ugh.
That's another thing. So like the scene at the horse track when one of his former clients comes up.
Yeah.
Was that, what the hell was the point of it? They're trying to like hint that, he's a little bit shady. He's got some shady stuff in his past, but there's no payoff to that whatsoever.
Nothing.
None.
That guy doesn't come back. Whatever he was referencing doesn't come back and happen. Yeah, nothing. I thought the same thing.
We're just supposed to know that he's
I guess
lawyer
he was a
and
bad
he's
guy.
got some shady clients. I mean, newsflash, but guess what? If you do any sort of criminal law, you're going to have, if you do any sort of law, you're going to have that.
And then he's waiting to meet Penelope Cruz at the end after, so they can go off to Boise together. And
I think he's
just
in
waiting.
Boise. Follow up. Keep up with the narrative here, Jeff.
Is he in Boise at that point?
I think shit. I don't even know. That's how what I interpreted it.
Oh, well, he's in the lobby of some hotel.
Right.
And he's his fiance, whom he loves so desperately, is hours late. Dude has a fucking sandwich. He eats a sandwich in the hotel while he knows his wife or his fiance could be in danger and could be dead. And he's just like, oh, I'm just gonna get this sandwich here.
A man's got to eat. This is probably right after he filmed the Bobby Sands movie, so he was probably feeling it quite a bit.
I'm sure that's probably it. But and there's all this stuff that's just like so obviously stupid foreshadowing. The very first scene, Javier Bardem is, do you know what a clicker rope, whatever I don't know what it was called, but
Chekhov's
you know.
Bolito is what I referred to it as in my notes.
Yes, the Bolito is what
Yeah.
Chekhov's Bolito paid off, man.
Yeah, it was like, but it was so clearly like, okay, this is going to happen. Somebody we know. We're going to see it in action, right? And then Brad Pitt talks in the second sequence, about the I guess I don't know how else to say it, the snuff film that he had heard reference of, and I think we're supposed to believe that's what happened to Nora, right? That's why they sent the DVD.
I did not make the connection until they showed the body being dumped. Then I'm like, oh, I guess that's what that is. But that wasn't even clear.
Like, because he gets the DVD. The DVD just says "Hola," and then I think we immediately see her body getting dumped, and I think it's implied that is like.
It's not certain, but I think that's definitely what we're supposed to make. So it's the point isn't that connection. It's just that it felt forced, right? Because it was like, okay, we want to do this big payoff for this particular thing, but how do we shoehorn this in somewhere so it's obvious, right? Because there's no, like, Javier Bardem was literally just like, have you ever heard of a bully? Like, where does this come from? Why are you talking about that? I mean, I get it. He's kind of crazy off the wall, but it just, I don't know. Yeah.
The only other thing that I wanted to talk about is I thought this movie seemed wildly out of character for Ridley Scott in terms of the amount of like nudity and sexuality. And when I was reading one of our handy dandy resources, Ridley Scott, a biography by Vincent Labruto, it even talks about that. It says Scott talked to Lynn Barber of The Guardian about the rare depiction of nudity or sex in his films. So what I'm about to read is surprising based on what I saw, but then when I think about it a little bit more, I'm wondering if maybe this is why it was so cringy. He says, I find sex scenes actually embarrassing. I think it's possibly a bit prudish. That's basically the gist of it. He doesn't like to do them, and he personally is embarrassed by it. And he goes for broke in this one in terms of Ridley Scott movies. Like, this one is just dripping with it. And it just comes off as really weird and forced and cringy. I thought a lot of it, especially a lot of the dialogue.
Again, back to the Cameron Diaz thing. Every time she's in general,
keep it in your pants.
I always get bothered by it. I mean, her whole purpose is that like she's like this manipulative sex object, and she's constantly bringing up sex, and it just, like you said, it's so forced. It doesn't work in any way, and it's like that's her one character trait. And well, she
likes cheetahs, and she likes going to town.
Like that's just, and it's just like, well, those are good character traits. I mean, she's an attractive woman. We can make those her character traits, and that's literally what they do. That's all her character is.
It was something.
Yeah, and that's maybe that's a topic we'll revisit later in this season about how neither of these directors really handles women all that well. But anyway,
this movie did not pass the Bechdel test. That's for sure.
No, and it's actually funny because we got to near the end, and the comment I'd made earlier about how this is just like an overly long episode of Breaking Bad. I actually wrote that down, and right as I'm writing that down, Dean Norris shows up on screen. He was in Breaking Bad, and I was like, holy crap! I was right. This is a sign.
That was pretty funny.
So I guess, we've thoroughly discussed these two movies. So in terms of, the duel of the greats, right? Last week we talked about for the best of the best, right? Like which one truly embodies each director at their best and truly embodies what they do best. And that's how we landed on Schindler's List being the more Spielbergian of Spielberg's movies than Gladiator was a Ridley Scott movie. So the question this week, it isn't necessarily the same question of just who did it the worst, but the way to look at it is, who swung harder? What was a bigger swing and missed, right? Like who was more ambitious in what they were trying to do, and some things didn't work versus just lack of ability, I guess you could say. And if you ask me, I'm going, despite the fact that I think I disliked The Counselor maybe more than 1941, I think Ridley Scott gets more points for being ambitious because if your goal is to be, no Country for Old Men, we keep throwing that around because of the similarities. If that's what you're swinging for, and you miss, then I'm a little bit more okay with that than if you're like, comedy is just not in Steven Spielberg's wheelhouse. 1941, that as a comedic enterprise is just not him. It's not what he does, and everything on him was like, it wasn't that the movie's scope was too big and there was too much. I mean, there was a lot going on, but it's just, I personally felt like it was a true failure for Spielberg because that's just not in his skill set. Ridley Scott could make, if there's a good movie to be made out of The Counselor, Ridley Scott could make it. He just didn't this time. And so to me, I think I give him the edge in that regard. Whereas 1941, if there's a good movie in there, it's far away from Spielberg who's making it. It's somebody else who's way better with, it's the airplane Zucker. Is it Zuckerman, Zuckerberg? I can't remember what their names are. Steve, can you look up who's the directors of, or Steve, Brandon, could you mind looking that up? Who directed Airplane? But so yeah, those people, or somebody else who's more, who's a better comedy director, is going to be better at turning 1941. Oh, that was Jim Abrams. My bad. I thought Zucker. I don't know why I thought Zucker something, but Abrams. Okay, yeah. So put him in charge of 1941. You still got to change a lot of things, but you can make a better movie. But no matter how much you change, I don't think Spielberg's making that a good movie. But I do think Ridley Scott could make a better movie out of The Counselor if he made it now. Oh, David Zucker and Jerry Zucker also directed Airplane. There we go. So yeah, Jim Abrams and the Zucker brothers. So it's just Zucker. But anyway, sorry. So that's my thought. You guys agree? You disagree?
Considering.
Oh yeah, you just saw 10 minutes. Nate, why don't you? Steve's still ruminating over The Counselor, over what happened.
I have my answer. This week I am, and I thought a lot about this. This week I'm going to give it to Ridley Scott, and I'll tell you why. I think that probably 1941 is the bigger swing and miss. There's maybe even more elements of Spielberg in that movie, but this is not either director's fault. It just is a matter of time and when they were released. 1941 has had its critical reassessment. And I think 1941 is always going to be the movie that we know it to be. I can't get away from the possibility with The Counselor that I might be wrong. There is something in that movie, and I don't think there is. I want to be clear, I don't think there is. There could be something in that movie that 20, 30 years down the line we're not seeing now, that it's a reaction to something in society at the time that we're not understanding now, and still has that Ridley Scott craft. I really do like the Brad Pitt scenes, and I do, while a lot of the dialogue is not good, I really, really like those scenes. And I step back and I always try and ponder, particularly for, it's only 10 years old. I think, what if I'm wrong? What if there is something there that I'm not seeing, that this is going to be reassessed as years go on? And to that note, and I, like Steve, I scroll through Wikipedia when I'm looking at all this stuff. I mean, there are people who have said that about this movie. There are people who have said that it is a great movie. Richard Roper gave it 4 out of 4 stars and said that it was really misunderstood. Guillermo del Toro, the filmmaker, loved the movie and said that it was very misunderstood. So I just wonder if maybe there's a part of me that is not looking at it the right way. And I've been, we went into this episode knowing these are their worst films, that maybe I'm conditioned in my thinking a little bit. So I will give this week to Ridley Scott.
You guys both make excellent points, and I think for the most part I agree with everything you've said. I think ultimately I'm the same. I think I go down on the side of Ridley Scott on this. The first act is just so bad and so boring. There's a line that Javier Bardem's character. It's a misogynist line said by a misogynist character, but he says, the truth is you can do anything. He's talking about women. He says, the truth is you can do anything to women except bore them, which, as you know, as disgusting as the line is, I think it's accurate about moviegoers. You can do anything to us. You can scare us. You can upset us. You can gross us out, but don't fucking bore us. And the first act of this movie was so boring because everything you guys talked about. But once Brad Pitt gets in there and once things kind of kick into high gear a little bit, there's entertainment here. And there's movie magic in 1941 still, but I think because of everything you guys have said, I think I got to go with my guy, Ridley Scott. Is this the first time I've sided with him, by the way, in all 4 weeks so far? It might be. But I think I'm going to go with him. There's a decent movie somewhere in here.
That leave us tied now? Is that where we're at?
It does. Yep. We're tied.
Ooh.
2-2.
Yeah, I added to the outline. I thought we could start doing a tally going forward, but I forgot to actually tell you.
I actually meant to say it at the top of the show that if you had been watching, we were at 2-1 in favor of Spielberg. But
so what were they as a refresher? Sorry, he won.
So he won with Jaws over Aliens or over Alien, and Schindler's List over Gladiator.
Right. And Ridley,
then Spielberg Scott won with The Duelists over Duel.
I mean, you guys are wrong, but I'll take it. It's math.
So and now The Counselor over 1941.
Unanimous. This is the first.
This is the first.
Schindler's List.
Oh wait, Schindler's List was unanimous.
Yeah, I guess we did also. Schindler's.
That's not really fair though, because I mean that
that's a tough. That's a tough.
We were always gonna pick Schindler's List going into that week.
This one's
we had to do it.
I do think 1941 is not as horrible as people think, but yeah, it really did age poorly.
It sure aged poorly, and that's what I'm saying. Is like maybe The Counselor will also age poorly, but there's something about it now. Like, I wouldn't say 1941. Oh God, I love that film. It's my favorite movie because then if someone watched it, they'd be like, "Wow, you have a lot of problems." With, like,
we need
like how you treat women and just the general scope of how you look at society. Whereas you could say The Counselor is one of your favorite movies now, and people might look at you weird, but there's nothing problematic about that statement.
Yeah, fair.
That's a fair point. Absolutely.
And also, what other movie has such an amazing juxtaposition of the sound of a head popping out of a helmet and a cork popping out of a bottle of wine? I mean, right there, that should win the thing. Just going away.
True.
Exactly.
New fear unlocked, by the way. If I rode motorcycles, I'd be terrified. I would never do it again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right? Man, that was an inventive way to kill somebody for a movie, but yeah, horrifying. So yeah, that wraps it up for this week. So next week, episode 5, one of these two directors will take the lead yet again, and we'll call it our Frankenstein week, our Playing God week, where we're going to sort of compare and contrast. Not sort of. We will compare and contrast Jurassic Park and the Lost World with Prometheus and Alien Covenant. So, the idea being John Hammond in Jurassic Park and the Lost World, all the scientists there, they were playing God. They were bringing back these dinosaurs. And Prometheus, Alien, there's multiple multiple entities trying to play God, and that one of creating and societies and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to compare and contrast those. So that'll be next week. So stay tuned for that one. This is us signing off here for episode 4, Duel of the Greats. Thank you all so much for listening. We absolutely love it. Again, if you, Steve, hit them with the socials. You got anything you want to add to if you think we're wrong on 1941 or The Counselor? Hit us up, Steve. Give the socials.
We're at Duel of the Greats everywhere except for TikTok. On TikTok, we are at Duel Podcast, and you can always email us at duelofthegreats@gmail.com. All
right. And for Steve Shepard and Nate Carter and our man behind the curtain, Brandon Nichols, the producer, thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.